Hello, and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. It's a pretty dark day here. We'll be talking about Israel and Trump's attack on Iran, what a bad idea it is, how we got here, this, that, and the other thing. Before we get into it, just some ground rules for the stream. We encourage you to say anything you want about me, anything about the ideas that I'm expressing. It's obviously a very sad and controversial day, and there's a lot of sort of high tensions and a lot of angry things that could be said. And feel free to say them about me. You are not free to attack anybody else in the chat. You are not free to disrupt the chat. You are not free to use genocidal language against any party to this conflict. And this will be enforced not by me, but by our moderator, Loga Cool Extreme. There is no appeal from the Court of Loga. If you are acting out of turn, he will let you know. You had better listen to him, because if you don't, then he will ban you from the channel for all time. And there is no appeal from the Court of Loga, so pay attention to the moderator. Yeah, this is bleak. I've got a bit of a presentation I'm going to present, and then I'm going to, yeah, I can't, sorry, I'm just seeing it looks like they took out the Ayatollah, which basically just clears the way to an Iranian nuclear bomb, but we'll talk about that later. I have a bit of a presentation I want to do. Loga's going to be managing the chat. And then when I finish the presentation, I'll address whatever comments you may or may not have. Just that first question, am I shocked? Of course I'm not shocked. I've been saying this. I have a video from 2020 saying that if Trump gets reelected, we're going to get a war with Iran. So here we are. I do kind of feel like in recent weeks and months, I've been talking about it less because it's been so obvious that this was going to happen. And it's incredibly tragic. We're going to be talking a lot about U.S. politics today, a bit about regional politics at sort of a higher level, but I think it's only appropriate to start off with a heartfelt apology from a U.S. taxpayer who is currently murdering a bunch of Iranian citizens and soldiers to no purpose, in service to lies, and completely illegally. There are reports, there are initial reports, but they've gone from horrified tweets that could be very easily faked to Al Jazeera is covering it, despite what a lot of people want to believe. That's a very real news organization. So we've made it to Al Jazeera, and it'll continue to be denied by U.S. and Israeli news sources for another couple days until it's admitted 3 or 4 days later, is the typical trajectory. But it could be entirely fake. But apparently a girls' school in southern Iran may or may not have been hit by U.S. and Israeli missiles, killing between 50 and 80 children. That's what happens when you go to war. Maybe this is fake. Maybe it's, maybe it'll be a bunch of children in Bahrain, or innocence in even Israel has innocence. This is what happens when you go to war. This is not what we're going to be talking about at much length today, but it's important to remember that that's what the stakes are, and it's the number of lies in Donald Trump's 8-minute announcement of this conflict are impossible to track, but I'll probably try at some point. Now that we're actually doing this war, I should probably step coverage up a bit more. But one of the greatest lies is that Iran was rampaging towards a nuclear weapon. They have not been, according to all intelligence agencies, including the American one, have not been trying to build a nuclear weapon since 2003 as a part of the negotiations. They have been enriching uranium at a higher level because the United States keeps bombing them and keeps ripping up deals that we make with them. But actually, as of yesterday, if you believe the Omani mediator, Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign worked. All of these resources around Iran worked, and Iran was willing to not just give up any possibility of a nuclear weapon, which they have not been pursuing again since for over 20 years, but also give up the entirety of their peaceful nuclear program, submit to more invasive inspections. They were ready to do this, again, according to the Omani mediator, and Donald Trump started this war anyway. So all those children at that girls' school in southern Iran, whether that's a real thing or a made-up story, or the very real children and innocents and old women and old men and civilians going about their daily job who are absolutely dying right now in Iran, in Bahrain, in Qatar. None of that had to happen. This is a lie, and this is an illegal war, and it is monstrous. And as we get a little bit more into the political discussions, I don't want to lose touch with just like what a monstrosity this is. This on YouTube, at least, this discussion is titled, Trump's Iran war is turning us into serfs. And I'm not joking about that, actually. I've spent a lot of the past week reading this book, State and Society in Europe, by V.G. Kiernan. It's an interesting book. Disagree with it in some ways, enjoy it in a lot of ways. But it's fascinating because it describes a period of time in Europe where most of the people were just there to be abused and farmed. People were farmed for their money and resources, so a bunch of completely unaccountable elites could run around starting wars and killing people. And that's really what we've got here. There is no process. There is no, I will never be someone who's here to defend the Bush administration. But when we did something very similar to this 22 years ago, there was a process. That administration convinced the majority of the American public, shamefully, myself included, and the majority of the U.S. Congress that going to war was a good idea. Of course, going to war with Iraq was one of the largest strategic mishaps the United States has ever made, cataclysmic failure that drew us deeper into the Middle East and to some extent led to this horrific day today. But at least there was a veneer of public involvement. At least there was a veneer of congressional oversight. At least there was a veneer of legality and seriousness about what was going on there. I've spoken to many friends today and this morning, and they're just sort of checked out. They're like, oh, well, this is just what happens. This is not a democracy. 80% of the U.S. public in a wide variety of polls consistently have opposed this war in Iran. That's despite a massive, massive propaganda campaign from U.S. media. U.S. media that we learned yesterday is now going to be even further consolidated under Trump allies, Larry Ellison and Hillary Ellison's son at Paramount and whatnot. Basically, vehemently pro-Israel, pro-military-industrial complex, pro-Trump media is now about to take over CNN and HBO and Batman, DC Comics, if you care, and that's pretty horrifying. And despite that incredible media push that we've already seen, 80% of the United States does not want this war. Congress has not approved this war. Certainly, a lot of cowardly Republicans and Democrats don't want to go on the record approving this war because they are paid by the same military-industrial complex monsters that Trump is. But it's just, we're not citizens of a real democracy. We're serfs. We're like the servants of some kind of medieval potentate or some kind of early modern absolute monarch. We're just expected to fork over our tax dollars for these wars based on lies. I am enraged at Donald Trump and the disgusting thugs that surround him. I am enraged at the government of Israel. And yeah, it's going on to the people of Israel that do also support this. I understand that they're deeply propagandized. I would never cheer for any, the missiles that are raining down on Israel right now. But goddamn, those people should have done more to avert it. That Netanyahu is still in power there after being the main person who created the catastrophe on October 7th is just shocking to me. But, I don't really want to talk about Israel or Donald Trump right now because, frankly, I'm too angry and this is live and I can't appropriately measure what I want to say about the murderous Nazi thugs who are running the United States and Israel right now. So I think it's more worthwhile in this time of incredible failure to step back and ask, why is it that these deranged monsters are allowed to run the country of Israel and the country of the United States? And I think it's because it's a story of much broader failure than just that decrepit piece of human garbage we saw standing at a podium in a baseball cap, like some kind of thug. Maybe because he couldn't do his hair right at that hour of the morning. I don't want to talk about this because I spiral off into anger. But it's not. We wouldn't be in this war, and that piece of shit wouldn't be president if we weren't at a point of pretty comprehensive failure on a bunch of different levels. And this is a little pretentious, but I think it's worth doing. I was put in mind of a poem called "The Second Coming" by William Butler Yeats, not Yeats. I had to look that up this morning. William Butler Yeats. It's called "The Second Coming," saying, I'll just do the first sort of stanza here. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And I think that's a more instructive way of thinking about Israel's leaders and Donald Trump right now, is that they are the worst, and they are filled with passionate intensity. Because we are in a point of such disarray in American society and American government, we've created a situation where people who actually want good things for the world are either too disillusioned to pay attention anymore, or are just running into so many brick walls that that they're sitting in a lunatic asylum somewhere. Those who actually want to help and improve the world, have nowhere to go. And the worst, Trump, the militarists around him, the government of Israel, are filled with passionate intensity, and they are running amok. So 100%, this conflict is the fault of Israel, is the fault of MAGA, Donald Trump, and these sorts. But it's because we're in a time that is so unsettled that this kind of insanity is allowed to happen. That the U.S. public that used to care about its democratic rights and powers is being turned into serfs like this, turned back into the subjects of some medieval potentate who gets to do whatever he wants with our money and eventually a few of our lives. Again, we should of course foreground the Iranian civilians and soldiers that are being murdered right now. But I am an American citizen and I care about my rights and the way that they're being absolutely thrown away. So yeah, while this is definitely Trump and Israel's war, it's a much broader condemnation of our country, that we've become weak and stupid enough that Trump and Israel can push us around like this. There are many, the relationship between Israel and the United States is of long standing, has long been problematic, but it's never been quite this sad. And we saw it under the Biden administration as well. I mean, how laughably disgusting is it that Biden and Harris and a whole bunch of other people sacrificed their political power to help this weird little Middle Eastern genocide state. It's a sign of incredible weakness, not just in the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party. And as I think everyone who follows me well knows, I have some broader critiques there. It's basically, we don't have, this is also why we talk about Epstein all the time, is because we don't have the language, we don't have the democratic language necessary that we had for most of the existence of the US Republic, where we would talk about concentrations of power and how they were bad. Since the 1980s, we've been so locked into pro-business and pro-war fundamentalism that we've lost language that we used to have, talking about the money power, talking about just consolidation of power by interests that do not serve us and only serve themselves. So, we desperately need a broad-based governmental reformatting in the United States. We need to stop demonizing government, because this is where you go. If you demonize government and you spend 50 years telling everybody that government is worthless and government is corrupt, you end up with Donald Trump. I mean, this is where Reaganism has been pushing us, and this is where we are. We are serfs again. I was a libertarian once, and this is where the real road to serfdom is the libertarian approach of U.S. government over the past 50 years. But that's a very broad-based, too big a question for this particular day, horrible day, and the conflict in Iran. And it's only now in Iran and all of the Gulf countries so far, and is Israel, and has a high potential to spread. So I'd actually like to talk about something that we can destroy and actually would be worth talking about, and very easy to destroy and should be destroyed. And I'm talking about the United States Central Command. CENTCOM, in fact, if this is a new concept to you, it's a concept you should know. Central Command, abbreviated CENTCOM, has been running U.S. foreign policy for the past 25, 30 years. We've deferred to the generals that run CENTCOM, this, that, and the other thing. And to some extent, this has involved deferring to Israel, but it wasn't really in Israel's interest that we had U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan fighting a losing war for 22 years. Or 20 years. That was very much something else that CENTCOM did to us. CENTCOM is also dramatically more expensive than Israel. Israel gets more foreign aid than any country on the planet, and that amounts to about $3 or $4 billion a year, standard. Since the start of the genocide in October of 2023, it's been probably another $10 billion a year, something along those lines. The estimates go back and forth. CENTCOM, and these are just estimates because the Pentagon doesn't have to pass an audit. Every other part of the government, because we've hated the government since Reagan, has to go through rigorous audits and clarify where every dime is going. Not the Pentagon. They've tried to audit themselves and failed for I think a decade running, and with no consequences. But estimates are, again, Israel costs us $3 to $4 billion a year in normal times. Maybe $10 billion a year when we're supporting them in an act of genocide. CENTCOM costs us $50 billion a year. The U.S. investment in Middle East bases that are currently being bombed in Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE. We did pull out all our guys out of Iraq and Syria before this. If you guys have been following for a while, you know I complained a lot about how those troops were just in Iraq and Syria to die to cause a war with Iran. Well, we didn't need them anymore because we don't have a democracy anymore, and the president can just go to war with Iran if he wants. So all those guys were withdrawn. We still have a lot of assets in all of the Gulf countries that are getting hit very hard. And yet, CENTCOM costs the United States $50 billion a year. And that's when we're at peace-ish, when we're at relative peace. We're only bombing Somalia and Iraq and a bunch of other places whenever we want to. I guess Somalia is probably AFRICOM now. But so that's $50-60 billion now. This year, it's probably likely to be $100 billion. And CENTCOM is the entity that is driving. It's incredibly expensive. And it's probably personally responsible for a third of the U.S. national debt at this point. And it has delivered us nothing but horror and destruction and failure. It was a really interesting dynamic of the 12-day war when Israel and the United States, it was a little more just Israel at that time, which is bullshit because we are constantly... during the 12-day war that Israel started with Iran back in June, the U.S. was constantly expending munitions to defend Israel. So we were definitely involved in that war from the start. But during the 12-day war, I sort of lost my stream of content. Yes, during the 12-day war, the timing of the 12-day war was kind of interesting because Israel thought that the leader of CENTCOM was their good friend, and they were worried about who the next leader of CENTCOM might be. So they actually accelerated the war against Iran based on the personnel decisions of CENTCOM. That alone should tell you that you should probably know a little bit more about CENTCOM and start investigating it. But actually, Israel was wrong. They didn't have to be worried at all because Michael Kurilla was replaced by another Israel First general at CENTCOM. So no need to worry. CENTCOM, it's like I don't want to get this backwards though. Certainly, Israel has too much power over CENTCOM, but when you consider the amount of money that the U.S. spends at them, the amount of resources at U.S. command, I think it's a little more accurate to say that Israel's warmongers are just a subsidiary. They are deputies to the CENTCOM warmongers. And I think that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, certainly today and in recent weeks and months, is that the simplest answer to all of this would be U.S. withdrawal from the Middle East. It's important to remember that during the Cold War, back when the United States was facing real threats, or supposedly was facing real threats, there was no U.S. presence in the Middle East. And that was actually during a period of time when the U.S. actually was reliant on oil and gas from the Middle East. That's not the case today. There's no reason for us to have troops in the Middle East. It costs us $60 billion a year, at least, and that was in peacetime. No telling how many hundreds of billions of dollars CENTCOM is going to cost this year. And yeah, it just brings us nothing but loss and expense. And we're really at a point right now. I think it's sort of for years people have been talking about the sky falling or calling wolf. What's that? Crying wolf about the U.S. federal budget. But I think we are legitimately heading towards a crisis point. People, when crises happen, people no longer rush to the dollar. And so people are talking about, yeah, it's time to cut Medicaid. It's time to let your grandma die. It's time to cut those Social Security payments. Instead, and at the same time, we're jacking up the U.S. military's budget from $1 trillion a year to $1.5 trillion a year. It is absolutely insane. And another indication that we are not citizens of a free republic anymore. We are serfs. We are becoming serfs. We are becoming serfs to CENTCOM. We are becoming serfs to the military-industrial complex. And that's why we're murdering school children, girls at a girls' school in southern Iran today. Instead of, and that's the most extraordinary thing, is like Trump's maximum pressure actually worked. We got the deal. We got the deal that was much better than the Iran nuclear deal. And the Iran nuclear deal was one of the most one-sided in the U.S.'s favor, like arms deals in history. And Trump actually managed to get a better version of that yesterday. Like the Iranian government was like, you know what, fine, we won't enrich anything anymore, fine. And Trump and Israel decided to invade anyway and lied about it this morning because they are liars and thugs who want blood more than anything else. And just on Trump's basic miscalculation here is that, and I think we can see this in how successful the U.S. military was in Venezuela and how unsuccessful the U.S. military was against the Houthis. U.S. military power is important. The ability to just get people in place to throw bombs at things, the United States is completely unparalleled at that. There's a tremendous Pentagon industry based around the idea that we have real threats or adversaries. We don't. There is nobody in the realm of physical putting things in places that is better at us than that. Within 200 miles of the Chinese coast, we would definitely lose to the Chinese army because that is the Chinese army's home, Chinese Navy's home, Chinese Air Force's home. Anywhere else on the planet, the United States can get more death dealing there. And it doesn't really matter. That's not the actual source of U.S. power. The source of U.S. power which Iran is still desperately, desperately, desperately interested in catering to, but maybe becoming less so because of Trump's actions today, is U.S. financial, U.S. banking, U.S. legal, and U.S. commercial power. That's what actually matters. That's why it was easy to find somebody in the Venezuelan government to stab Maduro in the back. I'm talking about the new president, Delcy Rodriguez. It was easy to find that person to sign in. This is why it was pointless and useless to try to militarily fight against the Houthis in Yemen, because the Yemenis don't care. Or rather, the Yemenis probably would have been happy for a deal, but the Houthis who are in charge don't care. The Houthis are a product of U.S. and Saudi and old Yemeni dictator who was a U.S. proxy bombing of the Houthis. They live at the end of a U.S. missile target. And it doesn't matter because they know there's zero chance ever of the Houthis being welcomed into the commercial relations of the world. So the U.S. Navy is useless against it. The U.S. military striking power is useful against Iran because of not just the threat, but because of the promise. And this is the promise that Iran has completely failed by believing in for the past decade, multiple decades now. And this is the idea that if Iran just played its cards right, just managed to negotiate with the United States in the right way, they'd find out a way to get access to commercial power, to the U.S. world empire of money and financial power. And what Trump is doing today is making it really clear that that's not a possibility for them. And I don't know, I think there's a real possibility that Iran has the capacity to sink an aircraft carrier, kill a bunch of U.S. troops, maybe shoot down a plane or two. But I haven't seen anything yet today that indicates they're capable of that. Maybe we'll learn different by the end of this live stream. But even if it has that capacity, Iran as a centralized government is still constrained by there's the possibility. Even today, the Iranian government knows that maybe Trump will get sick of this and maybe we can flatter Trump's ego and get some kind of deal that allows us back into the real world financially and economically. I think the answer is no, that they don't. But they can still believe that, and they know that if they sink an aircraft carrier, then that's not gonna fly for them anymore. So for the past decades, Iran's goal has not been like the Houthis, F these guys. It's the Houthis that are the real axis of resistance because they really do not care. And the U.S. Navy has already failed against them. So what I'm saying is what Trump is doing here is he's risking producing a dozen different sets of Houthi militias in Iran because as long as Iran is a unified country, even if Trump has successfully killed the supreme leader, which I think someone was saying in the comments, it's still in Iran's interest as a unified country to keep trying to kiss ass to the United States and trying to figure things out. If Israel and the United States are successful in what I believe their goal to be at this point, which is breaking Iran up into a Syria or Yemen type situation of sort of competing militias, then our military becomes useless. Then we truly get a wave of refugees and terrorism that will beggar our imagination. The big resurgence of terrorism with the Islamic State in 2014 was a direct result of the U.S. policies of overthrowing Gaddafi in Libya and overthrowing Assad in Syria. I mean, a direct result. And now we're trying to do the same in Iran, except Iran has much, much more powerful missiles that could go to any number of terrorist groups, a variety of scientists that know how to build nuclear weapons. Oh, and there's 80 million people there. Oh, and it's also a population of people that have been under siege and learning military tactics for 50 years now, almost 50 years now, since 1979. So yeah, it is truly an insane, it's Trump Trump has the capacity, because the U.S. military is a very capable thing, especially if all morals and all rules of engagement are thrown out. The U.S. military is capable of destroying a lot of things. I am very worried that Iran could sink an aircraft carrier or something like that, but I'm more worried, frankly, about the United States being able to, or Trump specifically being able to go, well, that was a success. What's next? I think that is actually something we should be more worried about. What we do know, unfortunately, or it's interesting. I'm not someone who traditionally roots for Saudi Arabia or the Gulf, but in the run up to this war with Iran and June's war with Iran, the Gulf actually, an entity that's getting hard to talk about as a unified element any longer. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the sort of two leading powers in international fuckery, which used to be very strongly aligned, have sort of been falling apart in recent weeks, years and weeks, which I've been documenting on this channel and on the Substack. But in this, they are united, is that they really, really didn't want this war to happen. And I guess I'm feeling a little bit vindicated because I've been talking about this for a decade. But the second a real U.S.-Iran war starts, it's the Gulf that loses out the worst. There's been, I wouldn't go so far as to call it large scale, but there has been serious bombing in Kuwait. An airport has been hit. Bahrain, U.S. naval base has been hit. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia, which is a bit surprising, as the Saudis have actually been, I think, gone further than the other Gulf countries in trying to sort of make peace with Iran. This was not surprising, and the Gulf knew it, and this is why they wanted to desperately wanted to stop this happening. Certain countries, actually the UAE more than anything else, are really vulnerable to, we have footage, somewhat iconic footage, might make its way to the cover of a number of magazines. Does anybody still read magazines anymore, other than The Economist? The footage of a bomb going off in Dubai. Like, Dubai is supposed to be the place where you get to run businesses without taxes, and if you're a British expat, you get to go there and do sex crimes with impunity. It's not supposed to be a place that gets bombed. As this continues, we're going to see more bombing of those countries. Some people are trying to spin this as like, ooh, this is an Iranian betrayal, because didn't the Gulf try to stop this war? That's quite ridiculous, because all of those countries are hosts to, probably at this point, the thousands of U.S. personnel have thinned out to hundreds of U.S. personnel on the ground, but they are still operating systems, radar systems, anti-air systems that are vitally important to any kind of Iranian success in this war that, again, Israel and the United States launched against it. This is a defensive war that Iran is fighting, and it has no choice but to go after U.S. assets in these countries if it wants to have any hope of making real strikes against the U.S. assets that are killing young girls in Iranian schools right now, and strike Israel. But it has been interesting. One of my takeaways from the first day of this conflict is the extent to which the Gulf is already getting hit fairly hard, and I expect that to continue. It is a completely open question what capacity Iran actually has. I think a lot of people are invested in this idea that, oh, this is going to be Trump's Iraq, he's toast, this isn't going to work at all. The American public does not have a lot of time to dedicate to this issue. And if U.S. troops are not dying in large numbers, they're going to defer to Donald Trump to some degree, but also his Democratic opposition, also the media brands that they trust that are now more and more owned by Donald Trump's friends. And if no U.S. soldiers die, and Iran eventually, the crazy thing is Iran has already conceded to a better deal than the JCPOA. And it's entirely possible, and I think this would be the worst result, that Iran will sort of throw out missiles at a diminishing rate over the next couple days, and then eventually be like, uncle, and Donald Trump can say, "Oh, well, I'll just take that deal you already conceded to before we started bombing you," and like that could be it, and that could be spun as a huge victory for Donald Trump. So I think there's certainly some people in the Democratic leadership who are perhaps just using this as a cover for their cowardice, who are telling themselves, well, Donald Trump is going to lose. This is going to be Trump's Iraq, so I'm just going to get out of the way and let him fail. This might not be a failure for him. This might be a big success. It's entirely possible that, like Venezuela, Venezuela it was incredibly obvious. With Iran, it's become more obvious over the past 10 years that this whole axis of resistance, this whole idea of Iran as this big, scary monster was just really just professional wrestling. Was just an excuse to allow CENTCOM to eat up $60 billion of our money every year. It's a fraud. So the chances are, there is a chance that Iran's going to put up a real fight here. Very possible. But it's also quite possible that it was always a fraud. The axis of resistance certainly always was. If we do successfully longer term, if we successfully take out Iran, then Israel will be even less constrained, and they'll probably go after Turkey. It's been amazing how quickly the Israeli propaganda has turned against Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia sort of fell out with the UAE a little bit, kind of damaged Israeli plans to create a big anti-Houthi base in Somaliland, basically sort of knocked out a whole bunch of UAE proxies in Yemen that would have facilitated that process for Israel. And Israel's like, oh, wow, we got to destroy the Sunni axis now. And I think it's quite telling that after talking about this Shia axis of resistance, sort of Iraq, Lebanon, Syria wasn't really Shia, but was sort of with Iran. Talking about this axis of resistance, now it's sort of been proven to be nothing. So the Israeli propagandists are now moving on to the Sunni axis and talking about Saudi Arabia again and talking about attacking Turkey, which is a NATO country. It's pretty bleak, any way you put it. Either Iran takes out a U.S. aircraft carrier or carpet bombs, parts of Israel, or it was never really an actual threat in the first place, and the U.S. and Israel move on to taking out, countries that are further afield, which is really bleak. The Gulf getting hit, I'm not sure when have the Asian markets opened yet? Do we know what the oil price is doing yet? But something else that's being sacrificed to this, military-industrial complex lust for war is any possibility of rate cuts in the United States. This is super inflationary. There were a large number of factors that led to the return of inflation in 2021, 2022. I haven't seen any kind of conclusive evidence, but it's entirely possible that the COVID-related money printing got inflation started. But what everybody agrees was a big factor in that was the war between Russia and Ukraine. That was certainly one of the main factors, among other factors, that COVID supply constraints, money printing, and certainly the Russian invasion of Ukraine and attempts to crush Russian oil exports really drove prices through the roof briefly. And that launched the sort of inflationary spiral. That was the thing right before the inflationary spiral. And we're already seeing Gulf countries shut down. Iran hasn't taken any formal steps to blockade the Persian Gulf, but big, massive oil tankers are doing a self-blockade. They're not going into a place where people are firing missiles back and forth. The oil market, the world oil market, is still in such a state, is much more durable than it used to be. thanks to the shale revolution in the United States. We've been sort of amazed on this channel talking about things that, like in the 2000s, like between 2000 and 2009, like would have instantly sent oil prices to 200. Like things like in 2019, Iran and the Houthis like took out half of Saudi Arabia's oil industry for like a day or two. And it had very little effect on the market. What can still have a real effect on the market, much larger than Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is any kind of sustained disruption of Persian Gulf oil. Today is a sustained disruption of Persian Gulf oil. I don't know what the market is going to do, but I think it's possible that you could see oil prices go up like 25% tomorrow. Depends on a lot of things. What happens tomorrow, what the state of the war is tomorrow. But if the level of disruption that we've seen today persists for 5 days, yeah, we're going to see oil go through the roof, which means we're going to see inflationary effects across the entire planet, which means that if Kevin Warsh, the guy who is going to be the new Federal Reserve Chair in May, does any kind of rate cuts the way that Trump wants, he's a delusional moron. So, yeah, like the effects of this are pretty bleak. The Supreme Leader. So do we have more concrete news now? Is it made it to bigger headlines? Have we got a confirmation that the Supreme Leader is actually dead? Because I saw back and forth on that a couple hours ago. I'm not. Do we Iranian attacks on Israel shine a light on shelters? Oh, Jesus Christ, who cares? So I don't know if do we have actual confirmation on whether or not the Supreme Leader has been killed? I did a short on this, but the Supreme Leader, the only thing, his highest hope at this point is, I think, an 86-year-old is to die by U.S. and Israeli bullets. That is the best possible service that he could do for his cause. Becoming a martyr, because at this point he just looks like an idiot. He looks sort of like a super Hugo Chavez, like this guy who talked a really big game about opposing the United States and failed miserably, brought decades of misery to his country through sanctions and whatnot, and was too chicken to actually get the nuclear bomb. One thing that's pretty clear to people who study this stuff, but just never gets mentioned in the New York Times, is that one of the main reasons that Iran does not have a nuclear bomb is the Supreme Leader. Because the Supreme Leader had his pride, and he had his dignity, and he had his commitment to the revolutionary cause. Those are all real. But he also held out hope that he could just get that right deal that would mean that Iran would be able to be accepted back into the community of nations and back into the U.S. world financial empire if they just did like the right things, and he never actually went for the bomb. And I am as anti-proliferation as anybody else, as anybody really, certainly more anti-proliferation than anybody in the U.S. government. I've written on that recently on the Substack. But obviously Iran should have gotten a nuclear bomb. And the fact that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, stood in the way of getting a nuclear bomb for as long as he did is just an extraordinary failure. So really the best thing that could happen for Khamenei's legacy is to get killed by a U.S. bomb. And the best thing for the U.S. and Israeli agenda of getting Iran a nuclear bomb, apparently, is also to kill him. So, yeah, I guess, huzzah. I don't think that killing the Supreme Leader or killing really anybody else in the leadership will lead to the effects that the U.S. or Israel want. We saw this in the 12-Day War. I think they sort of held off on killing the Supreme Leader or the president. But at the outset of the 12-Day War in June of 2025, where Israel attacked Iran with the U.S. backup, they decimated. Decimated is only 10%, right? Like they wiped out a ton of Iran's military leadership, and it did not matter. The missiles kept coming from Iran throughout the entirety of the conflict. And in fact, I think they got their last, they sort of forewarned the U.S. that they retaliated against the U.S. strikes against the nuclear facilities. But Iran got the last shots in the 12-day war, which is just sort of indicates that who cares if you wipe out the leadership. And frankly, wiping out the supreme leader would probably prompt a bunch of Iranians who hate him to start liking him again. So that's the presentation I have today, 46 minutes. I'm happy to dive into any questions that anybody has. As ever, this is a financial operation. So if your question comes with a donation, a super chat, I will be more likely to read those comments. Greetings and salutations, Patrick Bateman, American Psycho. That's nice to see you. Is your doomsday scenario going to happen after the Gulf oil shutdown? What is my doomsday scenario? The Gulf oil shutdown is, basically happening. Oil prices will go through the roof. If it seems like at this point, even the U.S. and Israel are being somewhat leery about blowing up Iranian refineries and whatnot, if they do not get what they want in the coming days, it's possible that Israel and the United States will start blowing up refineries, which means that Iran will probably start blowing up some Gulf refineries, which would be a sort of doomsday scenario. It would be, so we're already going to get, regardless, we're going to get inflationary effects from this war. If this war resolves in the next 2 or 3 days, it could just be another blip, and it'll be fine. If this war goes on with the level of bombing of Gulf installations that we've seen for like a couple weeks, yeah, this should be worse than the oil price spike we got from Russia and Ukraine, and that oil price spike that we got from Russia and Ukraine sort of like reignited worldwide inflation. So it's frustrating because there are some indications, not that you can trust any financial recording coming out of the U.S. government, but there's a distinct chance that inflation had finally cooled, and there was a real possibility for folks to lower rates in the United States, which a lot of people desperately want, especially anybody who's trying to sell a home in the United States. But yeah, this war lasting more than a day or two, which it seems very likely to do, is going to basically mean inflation comes roaring back, which is real sad. The end of the American empire scenario. Well, Donald Trump has proved that American empire is a lot more durable than I thought. And to be clear, I'm someone who's often said the United States is much more powerful than recognized. The fact that the United States has had the 2 months that it has had, taking over Venezuela, threatening Greenland again, and now this, we are only 2 months into 2026. And the aggression that Trump has carried out, apparently successfully, is bonkers. But this is apparently something that's just going to keep happening. And I think what Trump is proving is that the United States was never really at any risk. Absolutely, I can't think of, first off, where the hell is BRICS? We were talking about how BRICS was supposed to be this big alternative. What is BRICS doing? I think we've demonstrated quite clearly that if you've got someone belligerent enough at the head of the United States, BRICS is just simply not a factor. Europe, it's been incredible how cowardly. I need to figure out how to do this, but it was Rubio went to Munich. Remember 1938, and gave Europe crumbs, like little bit of we're all white supremacists together, right? We're part of the same system. We like colonialism and murder, right? And they're clapping like seals at Munich. And just looking at Ursula von der Leyen, and Kaja Kallas, who's the vice president of the European Commission, just these craven Neville Chamberlain type statements coming from European leaders, even Macron, who's sort of made a big stink about being, occasionally interested in individual European independence. Mark Carney, who put everybody's hearts aflutter. This is the Canadian Prime Minister talking about, it's time to take down the sign that endorses authoritarianism. We're going to talk about the hegemon, and we're going to start defending our own interests. Came out with like the most craven, Iran's super bad statement today. So, yeah, I mean, Trump has really, on the one hand, sort of vindicated things that I've been saying for quite some time, which is, in fact, the United States is much more powerful. And a lot of these threats we talk about are immaterial. But in the longer term, there will be consequences. There will be consequences for this. And I mean, just the mere fact that Rubio, I think I have watched the entire Rubio speech at the Munich Security Conference, and it's not just we miss imperialism and think things were better with the Nazis. But that's sort of the message, and the global South is receiving it. There are plenty of people in Europe who are not part of the sort of traditional Atlanticist elite, clapping like seals, eager to make Neville Chamberlain-style deals in Munich with Marco Rubio. There are plenty of people in Europe who are not on board with that. There are plenty of people in the interstices of global finance who are making plans and looking for something better, bigger, better, and different, but they are not anywhere near as powerful or imminent as had been advertised. So, yeah. James Parker says Europe will stand up to the U.S. if they threaten Europe. That's about it. But will they even really? I mean, I was sort of my doomsday thing is okay, Trump got away with the Venezuela thing scot-free. He's going to do the Iran thing. Maybe he'll get away with that scot-free. What's the next escalation? Is he going to threaten Russia in some way, or is he going to threaten Europe in some way? Is he going to just go take Greenland now, or is he going to try to pick some fight over Taiwan? Hopefully not. Is he going to decide North Korea is the next on the docket? And if he goes after Russia or China with this kind of attitude, yeah, there's a real chance of human civilization ending with a nuclear war. I think the realist chance of a collapse of U.S. empire in a world where there's still a world after U.S. empire is European dissolution. Disillusion with the United States, which is already very real and very large, but has apparently had zero impact at the level of leadership. Pete Wenzel says, do you think Iran could respond more forcefully, effectively if they really wanted to? Sink an aircraft carrier and finally close the door on ever being allowed to return to being a normal country. Do you... So the specific example of sinking an aircraft carrier is very interesting. I generally have no faith in aircraft carriers. I think the aircraft carrier, I mean, it's not like, one of the aircraft carriers is somewhere in the Mediterranean, and one of them is what, berthed in Oman or something. It's not that close to Iran. But the NC Diplomacy Meetup makes a very good point. Next up is Cuba. Maybe we just invade Cuba, which is possible. Do you think Iran could respond more forcefully, effectively if they really wanted to? Sink an aircraft carrier and finally close the door on never being allowed to return to being a normal country. I think Iran could absolutely respond more forcefully. One thing that they could do, well within their capacity, is going after Gulf oil infrastructure. So leaving aside whether or not they can spare enough munitions for one target to take out an aircraft carrier, I just don't know. I don't know what that math is. I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. But absolutely, I think Iran could go harder on closing down the Strait of Hormuz, destroying Gulf oil and gas infrastructure. Fine, you can't have our oil, you can't have anybody's oil. So Iran absolutely could take those. But at this point, and this is savvy by the Gulf countries, they have positioned themselves to be, Iran is, as we speak, striking the Gulf countries, and I believe has killed people in the Gulf countries. but that is mostly, I believe at this point, and in attempts to take out U.S. military infrastructure. I think that the oil and gas production infrastructure in those countries those are much softer targets. Oil and gas explode, after all. And Iran could respond much more forcefully and just take that out. I mean, if we truly were at like the regime is falling and doesn't care anymore, they could just knock out all the oil and gas in the Persian Gulf. And that would be forceful. But even at this point, Iran still wants to make a deal. And thought they made a deal last night, I mean, even though it would be a victory for Trump, it would be ideal, for Trump to now say, okay, I've done it. And look, they've decided to give us their nuclear program. That would be amazing. That is, of course, not what Israel wants, and that's not what CENTCOM wants. I think that's just a key point. Like, Trump is, and any U.S. president is like a political animal to some point, and he can't be happy that he's like in a big war. And if he could like call this a big win and get out of it, I think he'd be happy to do that. That is not what the massive infrastructures of CENTCOM want. That is not what the Pentagon wants. That is not what, and yeah, there's some generals who are like, gee whiz, this could be bad. But, if there's still a war going on in the Middle East, 2 months from now, that means that CENTCOM and the Middle East guys get a bigger slice of that $1.5 trillion we're supposed to spend on the military this year. So, they're not going to say bad. They're okay with it. James Parker says, aircraft carrier, no. I'm not that confident, but James probably makes a closer study of this than I do. Shut down all civilian shipping in the Persian Gulf? Easily. Iran could easily do that, Pete Wentzel, which would, I think, be a much more forceful response. Not the most important. Yeah, thank you, James. I did not put that in my notes, and I needed to. I cannot believe they named this operation Epic Fury. That is what I assume Pete Hegseth named this U.S. operation against Iran. Operation Epic Fury, which is just nonsense. Operation Epic Fury. I mean, it's not quite as bad as the operation last time. It was Operation Midnight Hammer. I think that the people have pointed out that Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration really like really like titles for their operations that could double as like gay porn films. So it's Epic Fury is a little less gay than Midnight Hammer, but yeah, Operation Epic Mealtime. What's that? LS Mork. Why don't we talk about Pakistan-Afghanistan war later on? But still, we should probably focus on Iran questions that people might have. Well, actually, Ellis Mork says, I honestly have been pretty deep in this and weirdly reading about early modern Europe. So I only briefly read like a single article on the Pakistan-Afghanistan war. Ellis Mork says he sees it as karma. Pakistan certainly supported, certainly supported. Pakistan certainly supported the Taliban at different times, but they are now kind of reaping the whirlwind of that. So the Pakistani Taliban, I think, is an insurgency that got started years and years ago and has been rather destabilizing of Pakistan for quite some time. The Taliban is apparently rather openly, well, I don't know. The Pakistani government claims that the Taliban is openly supporting and providing training groups for the Pakistani Taliban that carries out attacks. I've obviously been distracted the past couple of days and have not looked at the progress of that war, but Pakistani officials have said we are at open war with the Taliban. With the Taliban in Afghanistan, which is profoundly sad. It'd be really nice. Afghanistan also is pretty angry at Pakistan because they used the end of the war or the end of the U.S. occupation to, I think, kick like 1.5 million Afghan refugees out of Pakistan and back into Afghanistan, which put economic burdens on a country that does not have an economy because the U.S. stole the central bank when we left. Another real proud moment for us. So yeah, I have not. So I've not done a particularly deep study of the Afghanistan-Pakistan war, other than it would be really nice if that ended. I think that, of course, it now has carte blanche to extend as much as it wants, as diplomatic energies throughout the world will be focused on stopping this particular war as soon as possible. Chris asks, and thank you for the super chat. Hey Rob, any prediction for what the U.S. does next? Moves against Greenland, Turkey, etc. Seems like everything is off limits. It seems like everything is, or nothing is off limits, right? Appreciate the content. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, someone suggested actually, and I think that seemed very likely. The the do, 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 any sorry. I think someone pointed out that a serious move against the Cuban government is a real possibility, and would certainly be an easier win than Greenland. So Turkey is interesting. People have pointed to Naftali Bennett, who was briefly a prime minister and is a serious political figure in Israel. Has really been on the warpath rhetorically about Turkey. Turkey and Israel now essentially share a border because of Turkish support for Syria. So yeah, I mean that's a real potential fault line, but that is, I think, further in the future. That's sort of the wars of the 2030s that Israel is teeing up. Was it Lindsey Graham went to Israel and he's like all the wars of the future made here, and I think he meant that to be talking about how Israel, with massive U.S. funding, builds war technologies, but it's true actually. Most of the wars of the future do get started in Israel. There's at least 6 or 7 ongoing that Israel is either playing a big role in, or is the major reason it exists. But yeah, I think it's way too early to say Turkey. I think the Greenland thing is interesting. It seems like Trump starts off every year talking about Greenland, and in the background, people in his certainly in his administration and government, but perhaps more importantly in the private sector, people around him. One subtext of the Greenland stuff is that there's a lot of sort of tech libertarians who are super interested in a lot of tech libertarians who are sort of circling Greenland and sort of talking about how they could have some kind of influence or do business or do pioneering or whatever there. So yeah, maybe Trump just decides to do a Greenland thing every January and see if he can get more, and finishes his term by sending the troops in, as if we didn't already have troops there. So yeah, I think I hadn't really been thinking about it much, but yeah, Cuba. I think that's a real possibility, and I know Rubio desperately wants to do it, and Rubio is clearly a powerful source of bad ideas in this regime. So yeah, I think Cuba is probably the next my pick for the next likely thing. Oh, I know Pete Wenzel said, yeah, I don't necessarily mean a carrier, but destroy oil infrastructure or close the strait. The Houthis would do this. What would it take for Iran to act close to the way the Houthis do? They have to lose hope. I've talked about this a bit. Ungoverned spaces. Actually, the Houthis govern Yemen, but the Houthis come out of U.S. and Saudi manufacture of ungoverned spaces through U.S. bombing. So the U.S. And the Houthis, much like Hezbollah actually, are a product of ungoverned spaces created by U.S., Saudi, Israeli invasions. Sorry, losing track a little bit here. So I think to get to the point of the Houthis, you really need to break up Iran, which is exactly what the U.S. and Israel are trying to do. And then I think you will create sort of more nihilist organizations who truly do not give a hoot, and would be willing to just, yeah, I mean, it is such comically anti-security thing to do. The reason Somali piracy is a big deal is because the United States broke the Islamic Courts Union in 2006, because the U.S. didn't like the centralized Somali government that had finally reconstituted itself. In 2006, we destroyed it, and then Somali piracy became a big deal. Smashing Iran would create a whole bunch of nihilist organizations who just don't care and can't be stopped by bombing around the Persian Gulf. Smashing Iran, I never quite thought about it this way, smashing Iran would bring a permanent sense of insecurity to the Persian Gulf, and yes, would add a permanent $10 to $20 to the price of a barrel of oil, which is, of course, something that petrostates like the United States have desperately wanted. I hadn't really thought about that, actually. But that's just transparently obvious that if you do break up Iran the way that Trump and Israel want, you'll basically destroy Arab Gulf monarchy power. Not bad for climate, right? That's an interesting thing. Like, this war could potentially just be the end of the Persian Gulf as a reliable supply of oil and gas. Donald Trump, greenest president around. Jesus. All right. I've got two. I'm falling behind on the super chats. Has Trump given an update? Maybe he's still open to that nuclear deal pack up like last year if those strikes are enough. Well, Trump was gave a statement at like 6 o'clock this morning. And I think, looking quite tired and wearing a hat to sort of hide how tired he was. I think there was some sense that he was supposed to address the nation later today, and now he's just not. So maybe he's just asleep. He's an old man, after all. So that's about the update. Maybe he's still open. So if you watch the 8-minute thing he did this morning, it's Trump, so he could change tomorrow. I hope that Trump changes tomorrow and decides, actually, we're good now. We'll take that deal that they're willing to give us before we bombed them and killed at least hundreds of Iranians, probably thousands. Maybe they'll just take that deal and call it victory. That'd be great. But if you actually watch the 8-minute message that he gave, it was, this is a regime change war. He's like, that's about nuclear weapons, but he ran through this list of crimes, some that Iran did commit, some that they definitely didn't. The U.S. has coal. That's an Al-Qaeda thing. That's a Sunni, not a Shia thing. But anyway, his statements are in this morning, sort of launching the war, are very, very pro-regime change. Very this is it. I'm giving the Iranian people what no other U.S. president would. This is your chance. It's time to overthrow him. And even for Trump, that can change completely from day to day. It would be a pretty big shift for him to go back to the kind of language he was using back in June, where he's like, we've bombed the nuclear thing. This problem is solved. Moving on. That is not where he's at right now. And that's certainly not where the apparatus around him is at. If Trump had a different military or a different set of advisors, maybe he wouldn't have done this in the first place, but maybe he would be really willing to back down. But now that he's started this, now that he's said the things that he said this morning, he's much less likely to be able to back down. To be clear, I don't think there's any chance of him approving a ground war. Certainly special forces, probably already in there. Deniably people who can die and you never talk about it. But the chance of a real ground war by the United States seems kind of nil. But I think he's kind of in this for at least a couple days before he declares victory. Zendengade, sorry if I mispronounced that, says, do you think China will substitute Gulf oil with Russia oil? Certainly. This conflict is a huge, huge gift for Texas oil men. I don't know if any of you watched the Tyler Sheridan show, Landman, with, what's his name? Billy Bob Thornton. And man, Ally Larder. Big fan of Ally Larder. Anyway, Yeah, this is great for Texas. This is great for oil producers everywhere outside of the Persian Gulf. And Russia is an oil producer outside of the Persian Gulf. I think, yeah, there's a real chance that we're going to see oil and gas prices go absolutely insane this week. There's also a chance that's kind of been priced in. But no, there is not, actually. There is no chance that the blocking of the Persian Gulf has been priced in. The loss of Iranian oil for China or everybody else has definitely been priced in, which is crazy. Like that, you could just lose Iran, and it doesn't really affect prices that much. But you cannot, even in 2026, you cannot lose Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, and not have oil prices go into the stratosphere. This is real big. So, of course, what this will do is tremendously vindicate China's EV strategy and China's coal strategy and China's nuclear strategy. China has been working really hard over the past decade to get as many alternatives to Middle Eastern oil as possible. And that's been done through subsidies. That's been done through, forcing this through, setting up crazy competition where nobody wins. This motive will actually supercharge those Chinese efforts, and actually those companies that have had to have been subsidized and not making much money are going to now be making a lot of money. Like, it's also a great day to be a Chinese electric car producer. It is a great day to be a Chinese coal miner. It is a great day to be a Chinese nuclear plant builder and operator. And so that's sort of an interesting thing about China has been doing a green revolution and a nuclear revolution and a coal revolution to get away from Middle East gas, and they've had to subsidize that a lot. Weirdly, the prices of Iranian oil going through the roof are like a subsidy for that same virtuous cycle of getting away from Middle East oil. This will absolutely be great for Russia. I don't know that any new infrastructure has been built, and I think China was sort of holding off on building new infrastructure since the Russia-Ukraine war, and Russia's like, we want to sell you all this gas. And China's like, meh, okay, commit to a really low number. Maybe China's going to get a lot more interested in higher numbers for Russian gas if Middle East oil is disrupted the way that this war could. China will absolutely look to substitute with Russia oil. What I think is more interesting and actually kind of a hopeful silver lining is that all those EV companies that have been annihilating shareholder value and with ruinous competition and sort of struggling along with Chinese government subsidies are getting a tremendous shot in the arm. So the Chinese Green Revolution that was already leaving the United States and Europe in the dust is about to be supercharged further by actual profits, because the oil and gas alternatives are potentially going to get a lot more expensive. So there's that. What if the Houthis invade Hijaz? I think we're not there yet. You'd have to see Saudi Arabia fall for the Houthis to invade Hijaz. And that is sort of interesting, though, because the Saudis have invested a lot in peace with the Houthis in Iran over the past 5 years, since that 2019 attack where they knocked out half the Saudi oil and gas industry for a day or two. So I don't think the Houthis are probably going to launch an inter-Islamic war at this point. But I don't know, about a week from now, we are at a sort of slippy point where things can go incredibly wrong, incredibly badly, incredibly quickly, incredibly wrong, incredibly quickly. So yeah, I don't know. Hey Rob, in your own opinion, what is the future of the United States of America? We're not a democracy anymore. We're basically serfs. We don't have any control over government anymore. It just goes and fights the wars that it wants to. That's not good. So, yeah. What do you think China will substitute Gulf oil with Russian? Sorry, I am losing track a little bit here. It's been like an hour and a half. For the scheduled versions of these, we tend to do 2 hour things. I may not do the full 2 hour thing. However, thanks to Chris NL, I will say that the super chats will keep me going. Chris NL 92. Hey Rob, I know you don't like the Roman Empire comparison, but this is our times the equivalent of a mad emperor on the throne. And what can the U.S. public do to wrest back control? Thank you, Chris. As I said at the beginning of the stream, yes, we have a mad emperor. Yes, we have an evil, disgusting man, Donald Trump, who is in charge of our governing apparatus. But you can't, like, this isn't Roman times. One of the reasons I quibble with the Roman comparisons is that, like, I mean, we're talking about like a slave society that had a government of an aristocracy where sort of corruption was the point, and like even, I mean, after Diocletian you get something that looks slightly a little more like a mass dictatorship or whatnot, but like Roman Empire always had like a very small governing apparatus, and it was just a very different sort of way of doing things or what have you. And really, if you had an emperor like Caligula, who was a legitimate lunatic, then everything just sort of fell apart very quickly because a crazy person managed to succeed to the throne. That is not what's happened with Trump. What has happened with Trump is things have gone very wrong in this country for like 50 years. Like, Trump is the Reagan Revolution rotting. Trump is the true road to serfdom, which is libertarian government, actually. We've spent so much time deregulating and privatizing and finding market-based solutions that we have, substantially destroyed American democracy and American social provision. So it's time to go back. And I think I suggested one thing that we can do. We can abolish CENTCOM. People talk about abolishing ICE, and the truth is we can't really truly abolish all of the functions that ICE has. Like, I'm kind of an open borders guy, but I recognize that borders exist. You need to, at least for another century or two, we're going to need to have more control over the U.S. border. You can't abolish ICE. You can absolutely move ICE to be controlled by the Department of Justice, as it was up until 9/11, instead of this sort of uncontrolled Gestapo. Just thugs working for thugs like Tom Homan and what was that Nazi Italian? I can't remember, Bovino or whatever. Sorry, I've lost. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I was saying, so like abolishing ICE, it's a great slogan. What we need to do is abolish the Department of Homeland Security and like take all these functions that are still necessary and put them under lawyers and good managers. That's the other thing. We can totally abolish CENTCOM. Like, CENTCOM costs us $50-60 billion every year. This is the U.S. Central Command. This is the U.S. military entity that's in charge of the Middle East and Central Asia. We could just abolish it. We could just end it, destroy its bureaucratic structures, and move all of its assets back to the United States. And we would save $50 billion a year, and the world would get safer, and we would have one fewer avenue for U.S. military destruction. And I don't just mean destruction of lives and girls' schools that get blown up in southern Iran. I mean destruction of the U.S. Republic, which is what the U.S. military is mostly doing at this point. So yeah, I don't. So what it's a long way of saying, Chris NL, that like I don't see it as like just a mad emperor. Like, oh, Donald Trump is just this bad thing that happened to us. No, like this is a series of really, really bad choices, a series of really, really bad, really, really big structures that have left us with a kind of sickness. And I see Trump. Like Caligula really was like, damn it, we got a good system going on here, and this fucking guy's turning horses into senators, and boning his relations or doing whatever Caligula was doing, sort of coming. I mean Tiberius had his picadillos too, but like was a functioning emperor. Like Trump was elected because things are really, really wrong in the United States, and was certainly reelected because of that as well. So yeah, it's not quite the equivalent. I do think, interestingly, I do think a little bit more about Mike Duncan, who did the Amazing History of Rome podcast, wrote, I think his first book was A Storm Before the Storm, which talks a lot about Marius and Sulla and the way that the Roman Republic, 50 to 100 years before Julius Caesar, was being subjugated to a bunch of mad generals. That's got some parallels to today, I think. But yeah, as tempting as that is, I don't think I'll violate my long-standing prejudice against my long-standing prejudice against using Roman or Greek analogies to the United States. D-Man says Xi of China is laughing his ass off as usual. 100%. This is phenomenal for China. How comparable is Trump's escapades to the war on terror? It's like the war on terror, but dumber. It's like the war on terror, but more enthusiastically violent. Pete Hegseth is a disgusting individual who came to prominence pardoning U.S. war criminals. During the war on terror, I'm not making a case for the virtues of the war on terror. It was not a virtuous thing. It was a terrible imperial thing. But during the war on terror, occasionally a U.S. soldier would commit a crime that was so public and so egregious that the U.S. military would prosecute him, do a court-martial, and there were like 5 or 6 guys. I mean, maybe there's more than that, but 5 or 6 prominent cases that Pete Hegseth, as a Fox News commentator, decided to make a big deal about, who were men who were convicted of committing horrific crimes by the U.S. military, and Pete Hegseth decided to pardon them. Decided to convince President Donald Trump at the time to pardon them. I made video about it at the time. It was just like the most bleak and disgusting, like fascist action imaginable. And that guy ended up as the head of our Department of War. And he makes speeches saying we need more lethality and less legality. That's an actual catchphrase. We need to kill more people and observe fewer rules. That's the guiding ideology. And yes, I think it's tempting. Look, I will never be a George W. Bush apologist, or he was such a dignified man. No, he was a piece of shit. George W. Bush is the reason we have Donald Trump, more than anything else. No, it's a system, but he was like a tremendous fall was George W. Bush, and another tremendous fall is Trump. So yeah, like Trump is worse. It's just grosser. It's just more time has gone on without any kind of step back from pro-war fundamentalism, without any kind of accountability. I guess Hillary Clinton never got to be president. She suffered a little bit of accountability for supporting the Iraq War, but she's still on boards. She's still a centimillionaire. It's not any real consequence. And that's the problem. There was no real consequences in any of our systems. So now we're just getting worse. Our democracy is in tatters, and we're just murdering people on the say-so of Donald Trump. A lot of people could imagine that like George W. Bush was like a good man I want to have a beer with him. And Donald Trump is a disgusting monster. And yet, he is Caligula compared to George W. Bush's Tiberius or whatever. Like, it is just, it's very sad. I think I've got a lot of super chats to go through now. You guys are very generous and keeping me going. LNG prices are probably about to skyrocket too, like Russia and Qatar's natural gas off the market. That's crazy. Yeah, the LNG prices are about to skyrocket. It's a great time to be a Texan, or a great time to be an Oklahoman, or a great time to be a Dakotan. 100%. Russia and Qatar's natural gas off the market. It's I really hope that Europe has made it past the cold parts of the winter. But yeah, that's a very good point. It's a tremendously complex, interweaved market. and some of the like slightly more, and they're not marginal cases, or they're marginal cases post the shale revolution, but some of the questions of, okay, what's going on with Venezuela's oil and how heavy is it and this, that, and the other thing, and is it gas that's more important, and da, 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 da. In the question of the Persian Gulf being blocked, it's everything. Everything is affected. There are no substitutes for the Persian Gulf at this point. I've said this for quite some time. Like, the only way to save the world oil market would be war between the U.S. and Iran, and here we are. So yeah. So I feel like I should talk more about LNG prices, James. Do you have anything else you wanna add in the commentary? No need for another super chat, but more things to say about LNG. I mean, this is obviously the principal benefit of the war in. I mean, there are a lot of benefits of the war in Ukraine for the United States, selling a ton of weapons, a lot of F-35s, a lot of big new contracts for big expensive systems for the United States. But a huge benefit has been the replacement of Russian natural gas going to Europe by U.S. natural gas, which is great because we've continued to have an incredible glut of natural gas in the United States, to the point where I think they had to put in new regulations to keep them from just burning it off. A lot of James might be a little more familiar with this than I am, but a lot of the mechanisms of taking oil out of the ground also involve producing natural gas, and for a long time it was like, well, why even bother saving it? We just want the oil. But we've gotten better at that in recent. We've become more holistic and using every part of the animal in our oil drilling, and natural gas has become a lot more of a thing, to the point where natural gas can be turned into plastic, and it's making plastic that's so cheap that a lot of stuff that used to be glass in the United States, which is actually like a recyclable element, has been turned into completely unrecyclable plastic because we have so much natural gas. Now that natural gas is, a lot more of it is going to be going to Asia and Europe. That has certainly been the case since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And if Qatar's natural gas is truly shut off, then yeah, U.S. is going to do really well out of this. And to be clear, so LNG, this is a little bit more of the complexity, and correct me if I'm wrong about this stuff, James, is like, it's never really not been the case, even after we started shipping a ton of it, that natural gas just remains very, very cheap in the United States, because the LNG process is very expensive, and like you can only send so much. So the prices were a lot higher in Europe, but they remain cheap in the United States. So even if LNG prices skyrocket, the United States probably won't be affected because we just have so much of it out of the shale revolution. I think that's losing the Persian Gulf will send prices high enough that even the U.S. will be affected. But the U.S. is going to get a lot of the benefit of that too. Oh wow, so many super chats, falling behind, and also getting tired. Ben Orisman just gave me 2 super chats. Wow, thank you, Ben Orisman. And the question is, why is Iran hitting targets in the UAE? Iran is hitting targets in the UAE because the U.S. has bases in the UAE. Not just bases, but also radar installations. I saw a lot of talk this morning about a failed Iranian attack on apparently a very crucial piece of radar defense in Qatar. I think the UAE has fewer open U.S. bases than like Bahrain has had a U.S. naval base. I think the U.S. naval base might be the longest standing U.S. presence in the Middle East. Don't quote me on that. We might have gotten it from the British. Again, not 100% sure about that. There's an open U.S. naval base in Bahrain. There is open base in Qatar that's hugely significant. CENTCOM, which I've talked a lot about in this presentation, is the U.S. military faction that sort of governs the Middle East and Central Asia. its headquarters is in Tampa Bay, Florida, which is kind of hilarious, but it has a local headquarters, which is in Qatar. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that base had something like 10,000 U.S. troops in it. It went down significantly, but it retains all of these countries, Saudi Arabia and the UAE included, retain massive infrastructure for U.S. bases, providing, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait have active U.S. forces there all the time. Saudi Arabia and the UAE may or may not have, officers visiting, special forces training, this, that, and the other thing. But they also have installations, U.S. installations in the UAE and Saudi Arabia that are sort of ready to be unlocked and have U.S. troops move in. All of those countries. Sorry. All of those countries have U.S. radar installations, all kinds of U.S. stuff. Dubai does not, and that might be what you're asking. But Dubai, the city of Dubai, I'm sure the Emirate of Dubai, has similar installations. It's already kind of an iconic photo, or at least this was this morning, of Iranian munitions hitting in like downtown Dubai. That's probably, at this point of the conflict, a mistake. A missile that was heading for some other location in the UAE, one of these radar installations, one of these U.S. bases, was deflected or hit by U.S. or UAE elements, and some exploding element went into the middle of Dubai. I hope that answers your question, Ben Orsman. Thank you for the 2 super chats. But yeah, so even though the Gulf has done good work, I think, over the past weeks and months, and has given Donald Trump a lot of money in trying to stop this war, the reason they're trying to stop this war is because they knew it was inevitable that they would start being hit the second a real war kicked off, because the United States has so many assets in these countries. These countries don't really exist outside of the context of U.S. Defense, U.S. what have you. Fadel points out that Pete Hegseth of the Department of War got his start as a pro-Iraq war activist. I think he was a sort of veteran, and just as there are veterans against the war, he became a much better paid veteran for the war, which led to a role at Fox News, which led him to being in charge of the Department of War, the United States, which is kind of an insane trajectory. I don't know that he ever was in a position of particular power or seriousness within the U.S. military before becoming and not that you have to be a Secretary of Defense, but he was really just a Fox News propagandist for war and for war crimes. And that's really appalling. But he somehow managed to do it. Joshua Kale asks, why do you think the Democrats in Congress have such cowards? And how would the POTUS in 2028 change American relations with the world? This is a real Israel problem. You've got the 2 most powerful Democrats in, and some of this is contingency. The 2 most powerful Democrats in the U.S. Congress are from the city of New York. As I think everyone has become aware, there are a lot of New Yorkers that really fucking hate Israel. And there are a lot of New Yorkers who really, really, really love Israel. And probably there's more money for politics at this point in the factions that really, really, really love Israel. And there's certainly a lot of just institutional power around that. So Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who are 2 New York City, I guess Schumer is one of 2 senators for the whole state of New York. He's from New York City, but he's like famously is a fan of the Buffalo Bills, which is a far end of New York American football team. The state of New York, not the city of New York, like hundreds of miles away. But I think that's part of it. I think there are more and more Democrats who are getting angry at Israel, getting angry at AIPAC. AIPAC in New Jersey kind of had an extraordinary own goal where they went after a very pro-Israel Democratic politician who was like, while there's a genocide going on, we should probably restrict arms sales a little bit. And so they went crazy for him and ended up crazy after him and ended up electing a really stridently anti-Israel person who may or may not, I can't remember if that was a primary or a special election or what have you. But the New York Democrats who are elderly, like Chuck Schumer, or just elderly in their orientation, like Hakeem Jeffries, are going to be like the last pro-Israel parts of the Democratic Party that fall. And it is just our bad luck at this point that folks from that particular Democratic Party milieu are running the party at this point. That's one reason why the Democrats in Congress are such cowards. Democrats for a very long time, like in their DNA, this is where Joe Biden's fucked upness comes from. Are like, well, we got to seem tough and we don't want to oppose war because, the Republicans do so well out of being the tough party all the time. And this goes back to the Cold War. It's a long-standing malady. And, a lot of the Democrats in Congress go back to the Civil War, it seems like. No, they're not actually 150 years old. They just look like they are. They're in their 70s and 60s, 70s, and 80s and should have shuffled off a long time ago. So there's Israel is an answer to that, Joshua Joe. There is, and just the particular malign personalities of the Democratic leader in both the House and the Senate being New York Democrats, which is just a particular thing. There's the elderly nature. There's the traditional Democratic reticence to look weak on anything. They always want to be stronger, more powerful, more violent. And money, defense industry money. It's shocking to me that Trump has been like, you know what? Let's go from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion in the defense budget, and we're just doing it. I mean, that's honestly more shocking from a perspective of like fiscal sanity and like, oh, we live in a republic, don't we? Like that's more shocking than another war with Iran, and it's just happening. Like they're just figuring out how to spend 1.5 trillion, and Congress is not in the way. Far more powerful than Israel and the U.S. Congress is U.S. defense companies, and I've got a ton of videos talking about that. So war with Iran, good for U.S. defense companies. So. There are a fair amount, more than just the usual suspects of Democratic, and even a couple Republican congresspeople who've stepped up over the past days and weeks. Those are the only people in the U.S. Congress that deserve any support going forward, obviously. If they haven't been vocal, I mean, in this, don't give me this half-assed, Donald Trump should tell us more about this war that he wants to do. Like, no war with Iran. Like, there's no reason to do this. It's a nightmarish mistake. So how would the POTUS in 2028 change American relations with the world? Depends on which POTUS. I do believe that we are at a moment where a serious Democratic, look, you're not going to get like a serious like Democratic presidential candidate who's like sanction Israel or something like that. That's not going to happen. But we are at a point where a serious readjustment of the U.S. relationship with Israel and the U.S. relationship with defense companies is a real possibility. Because this is so egregious what's happening right now. And whether or not this blows up in Trump's face, whatever the next thing he does is likely to blow up in his face. So there are no guarantees. There are plenty of front runners to be the Democratic nominee for president who have no, ideas other than I'd like to be president, no sense that we, are meant to live in a system with values and democracy of some kind, or like a representative republic of some kind. And I see nobody on the Republican side. So yeah, there's no guarantees, but there's an opportunity, I think. James Barker says the 1.5 trillion defense budget isn't going to happen. I don't know, James. You got a little more faith than I do. Um, James says I'm right that the U.S. natural gas prices are unlikely to be affected much. And James Parker says like 2 out of 4 natural gas titans will just be off the market. Yeah. So the 4 natural gas titans, James, would be what? Russia, Qatar, us, and who? I'm from Algeria. Gamer Joe says, I'm from Algeria, and I've been watching your videos since you made that one about Algeria. Your views are very interesting. I like your videos. Thank you, Gamer Jojo. I don't think anything really changed with Trump's. I think it was obvious that he was not, serious about being an anti-war person at any point. He was serious about taking any opportunity that the Democrats were stupid enough to give him. And Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, by being pro-genocide, gave him a great opportunity to portray himself as anti-war. I think there's like some elements in Trump where he's like, wars are unpopular. I want to be popular. But also, first and foremost, Donald Trump is a rich guy who wants to do things for his rich guy friends. And he's doing a war with Iran for his rich guy friends. That's just what's going on. So sad that Bernie Sanders never became president. I have come to agree with you on that. I think that Bernie Sanders would have been a better president. Hey, Rob, is China giving Iran their technology? Which technology? I don't think so. I think there was a big story that was like, China just did this whole plane dump, but this, that, and the other thing. And then apparently it was based on nothing. It was like, OSINT bullshit. So, yeah. All right. Well, no more super chats. And it's been... Did I answer all the super chats? Yes, I think I did. And it's been about an hour and 45 minutes, and I've gotten the 1,000 views that I wanted. I think I am going to not do the full 2 hours. Thank you all for being here. I think to close, I just hope that this conflict ends as soon as possible. I know we've talked a lot about, geopolitics and this, that, and the other thing. I would remember the children in Iran, the children in the Gulf, even the children in Israel, who are potentially being murdered right now by the choices of Donald Trump and people around him. And we should stop this as soon as possible, but we shall see. All right, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you all so much for being here. And let's all hope or pray or whatever your floats your boat that this conflict ends soon.